Namaste everybody and welcome back to my channel. My name is Aditi Pakrel and I make videos about books and whatever. So if you like that, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. So today I'm going to be doing a book review of No Lopen by Bola. Let me read the background of the book first. Bola and his family came to the USA as refugee immigrants in 2008. Since then, Bola has been learning to adapt in American soil. He shares his opinions on American way of life, American politics, and his finding in his own communities after resettlement. No Lopen is not a whole history, it is a small effort to preserve an inch of history of southern Bhutanese who are now resettled in 8 different host nations. So yeah, let's just get right into it. Okay, before I continue on with my review, I want to say thank you to Mr. Thimsina for writing the book. So writing is one of the best ways we have to preserve our history. In 100 years, when we're all gone and dead, we will have our writing remain. We've seen this in history before with the Diary of Anne Frank and other such historical documents. From the earliest writing we have to the most recent, it's very important to write. It's one of the best ways to preserve our history and to preserve our who we are as a people. So I want to say thank you to Mr. Thimsina for writing that, and I want to implore you to also consider writing your own story. Me personally, I write in my diary every night, and that's a way that I keep my history written for the future. It probably will never get published. I'll probably never share it with the outside world. But when I'm 20 years old, when I'm 30 years old, when I'm 40 or even 50, I'll be able to look back on that and think, oh, that's what I was so concerned about when I was a teenager all those years ago, or that was such a cool memory that I forgot about, but I have written down, so it's in there forever. So I implore you to write your own history, maybe start a diary or a journal in this new year, because I think that's a really cool and interesting way of keeping our stories alive long after we've forgotten them or long after we die. So thank you for writing the book, and I hope Bhutanese authors continue to write books such as this one to help continue preserving our history. In addition to writing, I want to talk about some of the contents in the book. So one of the things I really enjoyed about the book was kind of how it gave context to being a refugee. There were lots of really small stories about what life was like. And to me, that is a really interesting part of it. So when I was in the refugee camp, the oldest I was while being at a refugee camp was a year and 6 months. So I have no conscious memory of ever being at the refugee camps. All I have are stories. So it's really cool whenever I read any books by a Bhutanese author to hear what life kind of was like at a refugee camp for them. And so that to me was really interesting. I see it in a lot of the books that I read, but I really liked all the small moments that most people would forget about that were included in this book. He talks about going on a picnic with his classmates, and after I read the book, I talked to my dad about it, and he told me stories about when he went on his own picnics. So I thought that was a really cool way to share Mr. Thimsina's life story, and it offered me a cool way to connect with my parents as well. So I think that was really interesting, and historically speaking, I love history, so I love making these kind of connections. Some of the most important and significant documents we have from the past are written about the most mundane things. And to me, that is such a cool part of history, and in the writing of contemporary history, it's something that most people forget about because we have the luxury of phones and we have the luxury of social media. So anything that happens in our life, we can post it. But what I think people don't really realize now is that in 100 years, we might not be able to access our social medias. Our relatives, our descendants may not be able to access that. So right now, even though people are constantly talking about how what you post online will always be online, you will never lose your digital footprint, that is in fact false. So I think it's really important in literature, especially memoirs and books written about someone's life, to talk about the small little things. Because even if Facebook is wiped out, even if the social medias are wiped out, books are going to be the one thing that stay. Anyways, one of the things that like I'm low-key a super hater of in books is when they're told in non-linear form. So that's when the story is told like non-chronologically, and I'm just not a fan. Like, I can't keep track of timelines. I'm not that type of person. Like, I'm not gonna like have a whole blackboard to understand what's happening in the story. So I'm really happy that it was a chronological telling of his life. I've read a lot of books where it's not, where it's kind of like a weird mix of like past and present, and like timelines have been weird. So I'm just really happy it was chronological. Like, another thing that I was really surprised about in the book is that there are some sage like pieces of advice in here. I can think of two specifically. So this one was on page 35, and kind of the context around it is he was talking about how in the refugee camps, they'd have a radio and people used to like sit around the radio, hearing what was happening in the world. And the tidbit of advice he had there: too much to listen, too little to understand. So kind of talking about how there was so much news happening and so many things that like were going through on the radio, but people couldn't understand it because they didn't have the correct context, or like the correct know-how to understand what was going on. And I thought that was like a really good insight, a really good piece of advice, because we are bombarded by the 24-hour media cycle like on a daily basis. So like we are constantly like, we have too much to listen to and we know too little to understand. So I thought that was a really cool tidbit that I really enjoyed reading. Another bit that I enjoyed reading was on page 122, and it said, "While silliness isn't always bad, it keeps me happy and often refreshes me out of daily chores." This was when he was talking about like how he enjoys doing the lottery. And I thought that was significant because as we get older, I noticed that people forget to be like funny. They forget that life isn't always supposed to be such a bore. Life's supposed to be fun, you know? So I think, I thought that that was a really good piece of like advice, to not really take life too seriously, to like enjoy the silliness of it, to enjoy the humor in it. So those were like two things, two little pieces of wisdom that I took out of the book that I really enjoyed. Let's talk about things that I didn't enjoy as much in the book. So before I talk about this, I'd like to say that everything I'm saying is my opinion. You may read the book and it may like completely change your life, and it might revolutionize the way you live, and that's amazing for you. This book unfortunately did not really do that for me, and you know, it's okay. It's still out there. I encourage you to still read it if you feel the urge to, because everybody's gonna have a different opinion on book. A book that I hate may be the best book you've ever read, and that is the beauty of literature and the beauty of art. We can all have our own subjective opinions on it, and that is what makes books worth reading. The ability to form our own opinion and the ability to, you know, make them our own. As John Green once said, they belong to their readers now, which is a great thing because the books are more powerful in the hands of my readers than they ever could be in my hands. Once you publish a book, it belongs to the readers. So this is just my take. This is my opinion on some of the contents of the book. So my first piece of criticism comes with the way he talks about Bhutanese leaders and the way he talks about why he believes he became a refugee. So before I talk about that section and explain to you why I am critical of it and why I don't really agree, let me read it to you. So it starts on page 48. "Excuse me, but in my sole opinion, Nepali-speaking people in Bhutan did not have to flee the country if we had appealed to then royal government of Bhutan in quite different manner. I believe it was needless to choose ranctious and hatred path against Wangchuk regime to convince and appeal about our fundamental rights. Even Drukpas would have supported our movement for human rights if we had done it in a more creative and intelligent way. We burned national dress in retaliation to taking our Nepali curriculum by the government. The revenge tactic didn't work. Premature leadership is what I personally blame in becoming a refugee. We were not politically educated, not planned, not prepared, and not organized before revolutionizing against government. Dear readers, you can disagree my opinion in any way you want, but you cannot tag me or level me to any suspicious links to Bhutan, for I am not candidly condemning monarchy kingdom. So, before I continue any further, I want to talk about Mr. Thimsina's word choicing here. So, the word national dress makes it seem like it was the national dress of everybody in the community, in the country, but it was not. It was the dress of the Nalung people, um, which they resided in the northern part of Bhutan. So basically, if you look at the geography and the weather of Bhutan, like the temperatures and stuff, the climate, the southern part of Bhutan is very hot. It's very humid. It's what you would see as like, to link it back to where I am now, Ohio during the summer. Very hot, very humid. You're burning up every time you step outside. The northern part of Bhutan, however, it's high in the mountains and it's cold. It is Ohio during a snowstorm. It is cold, it is freezing. So in the northern part of Bhutan, people wore very heavy like clothing, and that is what, I'll insert a picture of what is the national dress up here. But basically, those are the clothes, and they expected the people of southern Bhutan to wear that 24/7, which is absolutely ridiculous. Imagine, I want you to do an exercise, Mr. Thimsina. Go outside in the middle of the summer wearing a snow-like suit. That is what it would be like. It is absolutely ridiculous to expect the southern part of Bhutan to wear a snow dress 24/7. Imagine wearing a snow dress in the middle of summer. Okay, that is what I want you to imagine, and I'm gonna put it to some Western tasks here. While you're going and mowing the lawn, while you're driving to work or walking to work, while you're going to school without any air conditioning, while you're doing basically any household task without any air conditioning. It's absolutely ridiculous to accept that, and the comparison he makes, burning the national dress in retaliation to, let me read this again, taking out Nepali curriculum by the government in schools, which taking out Nepali curriculum, let me think of a way to explain this. So basically, it would be like, Governor DeWine goes and he tells the Department of Education, okay, it is like Government DeWine going to the Board of Education and telling them we will not be teaching the history of Native Americans anymore in schools. I mean, we already don't do that well enough, but like taking out the very limited Native American history that we are taught in schools. That is ridiculous. Native Americans lived here before we did, which it's not the same in Bhutan, but taking out the curriculum of a large part of your population, comparing that, that is such a ridiculous argument. It like shows that you don't fully understand what was happening. The next part I want to talk about is the first sentence, which said that Nepali-speaking people in Bhutan would not have to flee the country if we had appealed to the royal government in a different manner. Which, I mean, like, I just don't understand that point. First of all, people didn't like flee out of choice. People fled because they were being violently forced into leaving by unfair contracts, by like the government, the military. Basically, what the military did was they went around and they were like, leave or die. Which, given that choice, leaving seems like the better option, So I just don't really understand it. If you look at it critically, if the government is willing to kill their own citizens, like, I don't think they're gonna listen to a different argument. It's just ridiculous to think that they would, and to put that into, like, a writing. Like, books have to go through several rounds of editing before they're published. So, like, putting that into writing, and every time you look at it, you're like, okay, that can stay. Okay, that makes sense critically thinking about it. Okay, let's do it. Let's publish this. It's just low-key ridiculous. And then, Even Drukpas would have supported our movement for human rights if we had done it in more creative and intelligent way. In my opinion, I think that the Bhutanese government and the king kicked out the people of southern Bhutan because they were afraid, because they just wanted the land. When you look at things in history, people like kick out people because of the land. When you look at the Native Americans and all that, they wanted the land. That's why it happened, and in my opinion, I believe that the land being taken by the government would be beneficial to the Drukpas, the like people of northern Bhutan. So I don't think that the southern Bhutanese would have ever really been able to get the help of the northern Bhutanese, because for them it'd just be way better if we'd left. So I think that argument is weak on that regard. So I think the wording of revenge tactic is also very weird. This was not a revenge tactic. This was the Nepali-speaking people, the southern Bhutanese, doing the best they could to get back their human rights, their rights to exist as a culture, their rights to exist as themselves, in the only ways they could. Like, that was what was happening. It wasn't a revenge tactic. A revenge tactic suggests that it was immature, that it was something that, like, it was done willy-nilly, but it was not. The line of thinking that Mr. Thimsina has is immature. Like, I would call it childish, but even my 4-year-old cousin knows better than this, Like, it's just simply immature. It wasn't... Okay, I want you to imagine it in this manner. So imagine somebody comes up to you, and let's say I have my book in my hand, I'm reading, and they take the book from me. I'm not going to sit there, you're not going to sit there just idly saying, okay, you can have my book. You're going to go and you're going to fight for your book back, or you're going to go to the police, you're going to go somewhere to, like, report the crime or get your book back. Now imagine people coming after your home, after your property, after your money, after your right to exist. Like, as the person you are. You're going to fight for that in any way that you can. Saying that these leaders were premature, well, this was, like, the first time they had to fight for this. Like, and when you look at Bhutan, like, the people's access to outside media and, like, outside information, it was very low, especially back in the 1980s when this happened. I believe that up until 2008, people couldn't even buy a radio without a license from the government of Bhutan. Like, that is crazy. Like, these revolutionaries, these people who were leading the movement didn't, like, know any other way. They were protesting the best that they could. And it's not childish. I think it's very brave, and I think it's very important that they fought against their human rights being taken away. He also says, we were not politically educated, not planned, not prepared, and not organized before revolutionizing against the government. I mean, that was the first time we were revolutionizing against the government. And when you look at the history, so Mahasur Chetri was assassinated and killed by the government of Bhutan in 1952. That was almost, like 30 years before this happened. Maybe not all the southern Bhutanese people were, like, organized and revolutionized against the taking away of our human rights. But it was planned. People were fighting against this way before, like, it came into place. People were fighting in creative ways. They wanted their human rights. Like, you can't just say that it wasn't planned. You can't just say that, like, it was immature, it was revenge, because it was not. They were doing the best they could with the resources that they had at the time. This line of thinking is immature, it's dangerous, saying that it wasn't enough and spreading all this false information, because frankly, this is not an opinion. Like, you can't change the facts to support the narrative that you have. I understand that this is not supposed to be like a holistic history of Bhutan, but when you're writing a book like this, when you're writing a narrative about your experiences, you have to take it into mind that, like, this might be somebody's first time ever reading about what a Bhutanese refugee went through. This might be their exposure, so you have to treat it with that level of care. And it's clear that Mr. Thimsina did not think about that. And then this is just my own plight with the book. So on page 83, he writes, he's talking about the challenges he faced as a teenager in Bhutan. The last sentence he has is, I guess one challenge they're facing is how they can detach from electronic devices. Lucky they are. When talking about the challenges that teenagers face, like the teenagers in our community face now compared to the challenges he faced when he was a teenager. Like me personally, us as teenagers, we may not face the same problems that our parents do, but we still face a lot like of our own problems that come from being children of refugees and kind of growing up in that generational trauma. So I don't think it's like really fair to be like, oh, that's the only problem that they face, detaching from their devices, when a lot of adults also face that problem. So that's just my own personal like bone that I have to pick. It was just something that rubbed me the wrong way, and that like is purely my own personal opinion. And a lot of people might not agree with it, but you know, this is my book review, so I can pull out my plights. And the last part that I want to talk about is Mr. Thimsina has a miscellaneous opinions part of his book. So personally, I will not be talking about that part of the book. Number one, because a lot of the things that he says in that portion of the book, I believe, are quite problematic, and I don't want them, like, I'm trying to get into Yale here. I'm trying to get into a pretty good college, so I just feel like a lot of the opinions that he has in that part of the book, I can't align myself with, and I can't spread them on my platform, just for, like, future security reasons. So I just will not be talking about that section of the book. Sorry if you were looking forward to that. Live, love, laugh, digital footprint. Here are my final thoughts, you know, the moment we have all been waiting for. So a large majority of the book was pretty okay. He was sharing his own stories as a refugee, the things he personally faced, and I think that's really important to have written in our diaspora. The parts that really ruined the book for me are when he's talking about Bhutanese leaders. A lot of the leaders who fought against the government are one of the reasons why we're here the reasons we're here today. So I think that like disregarding them and putting them down like that and talking about them like they're children is extremely disrespectful, and it really like ruined the whole book for me, and so did the miscellaneous opinion section. So drum roll, my final rating for the book, I got a light bright, so this is what I'm going to use now, is a 1 out of 10, which is really low. Personally, I won't be recommending it to any people, but if you want to go and read it and figure out for yourself if you like it, go ahead. It's on Amazon. So I hope you liked my video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. I'm low-key losing my voice, so